as a business leader, you don't have your fingertips on the data. You're basically looking at the history. You're looking at a snapshot of the history that's conformed to the way the business used to be. And so when I was brought in, it was like, how can we modernize this so that instead of having data pushed to us, we pull it, but we not only pull it, but we can pull it in different perspectives.
Welcome to CVM Stories, the podcast on customer value management. Together, we explore how companies can be more successful and the customers happier through the use of latest customer value management techniques. Learn key commercial and analytical insights from telecoms, retail, finance, and other industries that drive CVM forward.
Hi, I'm your host, Egidius. Today, we are talking with Mike Burkes, Senior VP of Enterprise Information Management at Ultramobile. Mike will share his experience on how data management contributes to business growth and can even save lives. The lessons that he will share will come from serving in U.S. Air Force and working in companies such as Toyota. Join us to learn simple steps to data transformation, from building the right tech to improving data processes to growing strong data teams. So let's dive in. So thank you, Mike, for joining us today. I know it's
Thank you for having me.
I know that it's a super early morning for you. I think we have 11 hours difference. So usually when we start the podcast, I love crunching some numbers and calculating, what is our guest experience. But in this time, I will only say that I think you have more experience in data field than I do in my life. So I will try to learn from you today as much as I can. So Mike, could you share a bit of your career story with our audience?
Sure. Thank you. If you count washing dishes and counting the dishes when I was 12 and started in a family restaurant, yes, I probably do have that. But no, I think my career really started when I joined the Air Force. It's an interesting background. My father had been a rodeo rider in Oklahoma and had gotten hurt and couldn't join the armed services during the Korean War. So he kind of ordained that I would make that a part of my life. So I joined right out of our high school and had a fascinating career. I joined as a maintenance person, was later selected to be on the crew of Air Force One or on the support crew for Air Force One, so moved to Washington, D.C. and really had a great career doing that. During that time, I got a degree and took another special duty assignment flying for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff on a plane called Project Speckled Trout as a superintendent of flight test and engineering. Just a fascinating unit. We would flight test all day, and then our real job was flying the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff around on his endeavors, be them going to a wartime area to support the morale of the troop, or going overseas to negotiate with a company that a country that we might be wanting to work with. So I think it was just an amazing career in teaching me kind of the life and death of data and how important data was in the performance of my duties, because certainly the flight tests that we were doing changed the world. After that, I retired from the Air Force at the ripe old age of 38 because I joined right out of high school, and came back to work for the Air Force for a little while, and then got recruited by a company that I'd heard of before, Toyota, and joined Toyota as a business intelligence person, really trying to help them get through the Y2K phenomenon that everybody was a little bit worried about. So I came in right before that, worked for them as a consultant for about 10 months, and then was hired, and then had a great career at Toyota supporting them kind of growing data management and the thought of what data was to the organization. I remember, joining in early 2000, and sitting down with one of the analysts and just showing them how they could, use the data to kind of understand their operational efficiencies. And we found an issue that was causing them to overpay their rail carriers. And so within that first week, I was able to show that analyst how they could save the company millions of dollars annually in doing that. And it really was exciting to me because it was really putting data to work for them. Toyota decided to kind of relocate their operating facilities from the West Coast and from the middle of the United States, is where their plants were, to Dallas, Texas. And because I had my family chase me around in my Air Force career, I decided to stay in Southern California. That led to me applying for and getting accepted at a small company called UVNV, which was really ultra mobile at that time. And it was a small MVNO that was, under one of the major networks that really kind of focused their energy toward giving phone service to folks that were expatriates that come to the United States to work here and wanted to call overseas. Our leadership was really, really skilled in understanding kind of the challenges and had worked to provide a low-cost service. Very shortly after I joined here, Mint Mobile was launched. And Mint Mobile was really the very first online service where people could go online, order a SIM, and actually put it in their phones. Unlike the rest of the world, the United States had always kind of catered to folks going into a brick and mortar store and handing, a kid your phone where they would do the SIM swap and make this magical, change, and then they would hand you back a phone that worked with a different carrier. We did a lot of videos. We did a lot of marketing to kind of help people understand how simple it was. And, Mint was launched. Of course, shortly after Mint was launched, we went into, this worldwide kind of drawdown with COVID-19. And here we were as a marketing company that was exclusively online. And so our business boomed. And that takes me today, where I lead the enterprise information management team at Mint Mobile, Ultra Mobile. And it's just a great group of folks. We provide business intelligence, data science, data services, data engineering, data architecture, quality, and governance to the organization.
So, as I promised in the beginning, your career is extremely rich with very, very, very different, assignments and different challenges. One totally random question is like, for example, what did you take from military, let's say, to telco? What did you learn about the data there that you can use in your existing job?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think the military, you take the flight test engineering part of it, which was really something that, like I said, was really taking life or death situations, understanding how important it was to be accurate, how important it was to take your time and go slow and make sure everything would work exquisitely so that you didn't put people in danger unnecessarily. I flew on a platform that was a large, commercial, like a 707 airliner. And, that platform was safe for me to fly test, but I was actually writing programs that would then be transferred over to like a fighter. And we were asking pilots to turn upside down, crashing toward the ground, and trust that our data was going to let them recover when a warning went off. And so when you're doing things like that, you have to be precise. You have to have many eyes on it. You have to have folks that look over your shoulder all the time. So you go from that very, I don't know that I could have made the transition directly from the military to UVNV had I not gone to Toyota, because Toyota brought a very, very conservative nature to how we looked at things. Toyota is a company that I absolutely love. They really taught me that, take your time, get it right, and make sure that you're putting the best possible product out there in front of the consumer. Because again, Toyota was in the business of, making sure that they were protecting folks' life. And so you go from a very, very rigid, strategic looking at data, for future programs, to Toyota, which was very conservative. They looked at the data. They made sure a lot of what we did at Toyota was going back and understanding, where things could have been made differently. So it was really an innovation, trying to push and drive innovation. And then you dump into the telco industry, and especially in the MVNO industry. We are moving at 1,000 miles a minute. We do more projects than, the Air Force or the Toyota will do, because we're just always constantly changing, trying to get the best product out there. We're reacting to the competitors. So I think if I hadn't had that background in experience and that background and kind of getting a hunch as to when things are going right, and even the process building that I learned in both of those experiences, being able to take that process and put it into UVNV or Ultra allowed me then to scale quickly because of the process I had learned, because of the recognition of the importance of data. You are always following processes to scale. You're not having to add people. You're adding, better processes and refining those.
Mm. And talking about Ultra, I know that when you joined, it was a pretty small company compared to where you are right now. And it has a really unique growth as a telco nowadays. Could you share a bit of your perspective? What is the role of, let's say, enterprise data management in that type of organization where everything is, growing like crazy, the needs are like crazy?
Sure. Well, I think, when I joined, and I think the reason they were looking to hire someone that had come in with a lot of experience, but when I joined, we were still pushing reports out to folks, not saying anything against the tool, but we used Microsoft reporting services. And so every morning, our executives would walk in to their offices, they would open up emails, and there would be literally tens to hundreds of reports that we had generated overnight to tell them where the business is. As a business leader, I guess that's fine, but you don't have your fingertips on the data. You're basically looking at the history. You're looking at a snapshot of the history that's conformed to the way the business used to be. And so when I was brought in, it was like, how can we modernize this so that instead of having data pushed to us, we pull it, but we not only pull it, but we can pull it in different perspectives. So being able to quickly gin up, a reporting environment where a business owner could come in, a commercial owner could come in and they could look at the state of their business. They could drill into what they were seeing in their business. They could pick up the phone and saying, hey, I'm seeing this. What do you think? And then a team of analysts could go and dig into it to give them the insights. I think that's really what helped to allow us to be nimble. And I'm taking no credit for their growth because that was really the thought and leadership of our leaders that, really kind of set a path forward and executed on that plan. But I do know that data really helped them in that decision, being truly a data-driven decision. When you're looking at it, you can, as an example, if you're going to offer services and discount pricing for international, being able to show them what the risk was, what the value was of that, what the potential market was for that. That was great. Churn in the MVNO is always something that we have to deal with, being able to segment the users and being able to help understand, and we had some work with some of our great partners to go out and even look at our partners in the retailer space and segment the retailers to say, hey, this person is always going to bring in a high quality. This person's always going to bring in somebody that will probably churn quickly. They're probably somebody that's visiting from from outside the United States. They come in for a couple of weeks and they're going to be gone. Expect high churn, expect revenue from this group. Whereas this team is really, really focused on building a good brand and a good business for you. And in the middle, you have folks that were playing the spiff or the incentive markets, right? So I think just helping to recognize those patterns and put them into data. And then again, being able to do it quickly is really what kind of helped the success. And, to your point, at the start of COVID, we were a team of 140 as a business, and now we're over 700. So it certainly grew, as our business grew during that time.
Mm-hmm. And so it seems like, the data guys in this situation are the most kind of wanted guys in the room, because as you said, you serve from strategic decisions where you want to kind of make sure that the management has data necessary to kind of pull the triggers for the next growth. And you have kind of all the CVM customer value management initiatives, you have all the fraud perspectives, etc. So how do you manage to serve all those stakeholders at the same time, and from the situation when you are getting Excel files as emails to the situation where they have, let's say, capability to self-serve for a huge portion of their work?
Yeah, I think we certainly leaned a little bit on technology. We leveraged highly data virtualization because not only is your business changing, the background of your business is changing. When I joined Ultra, we were on-prem data center using, very old methods to do things. Now we're completely in the cloud using Node.js, and so we've kind of evolved over time. And it was really important that we the first thing I saw is we had to add a semantic layer that really kind of protected the business from the churn of what was going on in the background. As we moved from, kind of the monolith type architecture to a distributed services architecture where the services are very, very light by nature and they're being developed by different development pods by nature for the speed of delivering them, it was really important that we kept that semantic layer in place so that the data would always bubble up to the business in something that they could look at and trust. As we, kind of matured around our data governance and data quality monitoring, it became very important for us to come out and say, okay, here is a platinum set of data. So, you can get gross ads from many, many different places. But if you pick this gross ad number, then we are monitoring it from end to end. We understand the lineage of how that came, and we understand if there's a failure within that lineage, because there's so many things that can go bump in the night. You could have a failure in your processing. You could have a failure in your credit card processing. You could have a failure in the middleware processing. A lot of things that could maybe impact that number. So when you open it up and you see, what my net ads are negative today, well, that's because we're missing these components of it. So it's something we don't need to worry about. Or everything's golden, and yes, you have a negative net ad, so we need to kind of drill in and give you the capability to look and see where that came from.
Could we dig a bit deeper into the data governance and data quality aspect? If the functions that does not understand how the data is produced and extracted, let's say, from the source system, etc., you typically don't understand why do we need the data governance and why do we need the data qualities, because when you move from, let's say, a very fast report that you get in Excel early in the morning to the situation where you say, okay, to produce this report, we'll need to make extra steps, we'll need to make extra data tests on those reports, making sure that they are correct, etc. So could you dive deeper why it is so important to have the data governance and that data quality part?
Sure. I think you, as you explained it, data originates at the source in many different ways, and especially when you move into a microservices where you've got, a lot of little discrete services that are trying to maybe those discrete services will have a key so that they operate with the other piece of information that they're being tied to. When you look at those and you make your own decision about where you pick the information coming from, you are putting the potential out there that you're going to pick at the wrong place before that curation is completely happened. As an example, if you just take an order that comes through e-com and says, oh, that's a sale, you're ignoring the fact that has to go through a credit card processing, that has to approve the sale, it has to go through a process where potentially the customer doesn't receive the SIM, so there's a shipping issue there where they might come back to us. You go through a process where maybe they do receive the SIM and for some reason it doesn't work in the area, so they're requesting a refund. So when you look at all that and you're understanding how to basically come out and say this is a successful sale to a successful channel of our business that got us a successful product, it really is important that you understand all the nuances of how that happens. I thought it was important to use tools to be able to put in front of the business, what was going on. And actually, I probably, in my decision-making of how we went forward, probably delayed the business a bit because we kind of struggled with some of the tools. It was very important to me as an example that we had lineages. Not all the tools, unless you're on a single stack, which I would assume that probably many MVNOs aren't on single stack architectures because they're probably using, the most viable but probably cheapest tools out there. So they're not investing in the, end-to-end SAP type environments. When you're doing that, you run the risk that maybe connectors don't work as well as it should. So maybe it's hard to pull lineages from certain pieces. Maybe you're using technology that is a little bit advanced, or maybe it's a little bit old, and so the support for that technology is not there. But I think it was really important that we, be able to get a group of folks into the room, sit down and show the lineages, show them the importance, show them how we were thinking of organizing the data, and then getting their feedback. It's also important when something comes up and says, okay, we can't get a piece of information in this timely of manner. What does it mean? Is it something we should prioritize doing, or is it something that we can push off in a priority and get it, later in the cycle? So having those business owners that are engaged, they become self-teachers to their to their own. So there's somebody that the business can go up to because they understand the data. So I think it's been really important to kind of bring the business along, create ownership for the data, so that when a new project comes in, you can sit down with that group and say, okay, this is going to touch customer data. You own customer data. What of this new project do you want to see? Let's use for an example. Potentially we run out like a white glove program for helping some of our customers, a service that we could sell to add a little bit of revenue. But how important is it to understand how often do they use it? What's the cost of them using it? How many times are they calling care? Are we getting the value that we expected from this? And so tying that all together to kind of help the business understand if it's a successful program or not, not successful. I think that's really kind of the business value that we've brought in getting the governance and getting the stewardship. Because otherwise, you're just folks looking at data. You love data, and anybody that's a data guy or gal loves data. So anything they see, they might want to just throw out there, but it sometimes becomes noise if it's not curated in the right way and it doesn't support the business purpose.
And I assume that there is some adoption process which happens in organization, because if you used to get, a report, and now you say, okay, you are a citizen of all this data ecosystem. Here are some tools for you to consume the data. There are your inputs necessary, etc. How did that process work? What are the challenges to adopt, to onboard, let's say, the rest of the organization's functions to this?
I think one of the biggest challenges, and kind of getting to a roundabout answer to your question, but one of the biggest challenges when you do allow curation of data and you do allow self-service and you're trying to make data ubiquitous, then you have a lot of folks that'll go out and they're kind of download that golden standard of data, and they'll make some changes of it to kind of suit their needs, and they become important and listened to and successful, and suddenly those reports might be as trusted as some of the things that are being pulled from here. But as an example, if your area doesn't need one sales channel engaged in that report, you might have limited out that sales channel a long time ago, right? So now your reports are looking at a fraction of the business. So I think what is really important, as I said, is to kind of publish that gold standard. Here's the numbers. What you might be hearing from Mike over here, might be different when you're hearing from John over here. But this is the standard of reporting, and this is what we validate these numbers. We know they're great, and it's kind of you want to encourage self-service. You want to encourage having that ability to go into data and pull it, but at the same time, you've got to manage and make sure that the business understands what is the true source.
Well, I bet this is a challenge, because every time I get a report, I want to do some I have the way how I calculate my report.
And I think a lot of that's transparency, right? So a lot of the reports that we're putting out now is we kind of understand. And so as an example, if we're looking at our e-com, we'll show, here's the orders. Here's the orders after credit card processing. Here's the orders, of refunds that were requested. Maybe somebody had buyer's remorse. Maybe they were up at 2 a.m. and saw a Ryan Reynolds commercial and decided to buy, a SIM card. And then when they woke up at 6 a.m, they were, what did I do? So, here's the refunds that were processed. Here's the shipping. Here's what was shipped and successfully. Here's your shipping orders that were returned, because maybe. So when you look at that and you have a lineage, you can say, we started with X, we ended with Y, and here's the journey between. And that really helps by delineating those journeys. It really helps the business to come in and say, wow, we have a problem here. We're not seeing the data flow through as it should. So we have a problem here. Maybe our shipping to activation is slow. Let's understand, is this a shipping issue? Is it, is it a, people get their SIM and we haven't really prepped them on what to do with it? Is it an education issue? Is it a compatibility issue? So I think by breaking it down and just being completely transparent about every step of the way, it really helps, it helps the business to get confidence in what you're reporting, but it helps them then narrow down on the focus on what is actually good or bad.
So it seems like there's quite a lot of alignment and educational work down the road happening. It's not enough to throw the best tools to your stakeholders and then you kind of start the next journey. Yeah.
I think education in every organization that I've been a part of, education around the data is extremely important, right? Whether you're putting it there on the report and showing everything that's limited, whether you're building out Confluence pages or, whether you're building an information portal that people can go to, or you're leveraging tools that they can go to and understand, kind of the lineages and the definitions of the data. Education is extremely important.
And you also have been in an extremely unique position because over those years you did quite a lot of infrastructure changes, like from taking the data from source systems to building a data warehouse to pushing the data warehouse to the cloud, and doing everything at the same time when the organization grows like crazy. How did you manage that?
Well, it's interesting, because I think it's a business first organization, right? I could not, maybe at Toyota, I had the luxury of, at Toyota, we would create like a data warehousing project. Everybody understood there was going to be this huge endeavor. Everybody understood there was going to be times of outages, times when we were going to have to convert. And we went through a couple of product conversions at that time. I think we went from Red Hat to Oracle was, one of the big things for our major data warehouses. It was probably the biggest one we did. And I remember during that project, it was all very well planned out. It was executed, but there were downtimes. There were downtimes as you were doing data. When you shift forward to Ultra, and we wanted to move from Hadoop to Snowflake, you can do it. We're not going to stop any of the other projects. We're not going to pause any of the other projects. And you can't impact our ability to report any given day. So it's kind of like, you can't cause any downtime. If it's something that you want to do, then yes, you can spend the budget to do it, but you can't impact us by having any downtime. So certainly added a lot of complexity to what we did. Certainly probably made us make some decisions to potentially do kind of the lift and shift before modifying. But all in all, I think it was something that you just learn to kind of work around the parameters that the business will let you support, and you go from there.
I bet it's quite a lot of pressure on the team as well, because kind of from the engineering perspective as a team, you always want to make sure that you work in a good environment, like technically capable, the processes are running smooth, and you are at the same time you need to serve the business. And now the transition is always kind of, a huge overhead for the team. So how did you manage the balance, in the team? How do you keep the team motivated, to push for the result there?
Well, I think especially now that I'm a leader, nobody turns to me for my technical advice anymore. And the folks that I've hired are so much smarter than I am, which is great. I mean, it's fine, to have the humbleness to recognize what they bring to the table. But I think it's really all about hiring the right individuals and being honest with them as a leader. I remember distinctly when, working in the Air Force, and this is, kind of going back to a piece in time, but we would get our duties done at night, and I always worked the swing shift, so I worked 3:30 to 3:30 the next morning if needed. We'd always get our duties done, and we'd make sure the shop was clean and make sure everything was ready to go. And if it's 10 o'clock at night and stuff is done, let people go, because you always know that there's going to be that time that you're going to need them to stay, to the long hours of the morning to work on a problem. And so I think you build up that by showing the respect for your team and showing that you understand the struggles that they're going through to do that. I think you really have to kind of instill that. When I hire folks, I'm the last person in the hiring process, and I try to scare them out of the job. I kind of bring them in and say, look, it's going to be fantastically rewarding. This is a great group of people that we're doing. We're actually moving the needle in a smaller company, helping it to grow larger. But there's times that this is going to be rigorous. There's times that you're going to be waiting for a project to change and a project to deliver the night before we launch. And so as a data person, you're going to get something thrown over the wall that's completely different than what you had planned for, because something at the last minute in QA testing has shown that we have to make a change. We're in Toyota, we were very rigorous, and we protected ourselves against them, and we had preliminary design reviews and final design reviews, and we had architecture pieces that everybody signed off. Here I've got developers that are developing up to the very last minute, and and we also have basically a propensity to say, okay, we know we have a couple of errors, let's go ahead and go forward and fix those errors. Where at Toyota it was, you can't have any P1s, you can't have any P2s, to launch a big initiative. So I think it's really the team, making the team feel flexible, making sure that, we compensate them well, making sure they understand what we're trying to do. I think that's all a part of really making this work. And I have a great team. I'm so proud of, the men and women on my team and what they deliver every single day. I try to let them know that. I think they understand that, they understand and hear my pride and speak with them. I've always thought that it was best as a leader, to protect your team when needed, but when they're doing a great job, get out of their way and let them shine. So I've always been a leader that says, hey, you did a great job on that. Go tell someone, right? I don't want to take that story to them. Let them take that story. Let them take that self-pride. And it's interesting. I think this kind of, goes back to my background as a parent as well. I think you have to kind of stand back, let your team perform, watch them closely, use the KPIs that you need to kind of understand when maybe morale's going a little bit, or maybe the work's getting a little bit too long. But, kind of help them really stumble a little bit if they need to, know that they have the protection of a team behind them, right? I'm so proud of how we can have very important people in the organization, go on vacation for a week and we don't miss a beat, because the team just steps right up and fills the void. And so it's really, I think it's really about the team and having processes in place that they can follow. They can always go back and say, well, this is what I should be doing, or here's what Mike would do in his absence. So I think that's all a part of being successful.
So it seems that the team is not very small at this moment of time.
We've certainly grown. We've certainly grown a lot. When I joined, I think we were 8 folks, and we did all the fraud and revenue assurance, as well as the information management, which is always one of the joys. When you join a small company and they come in and you were hired to be a vice president of data, and they said, well, we're going to also have you run the fraud revenue management team, which I didn't have a lot of experience in. But now we've hired, somebody that's as we've grown, we've hired a team that's very, very skilled in that. And by the way, I think we also took on retention at one time. And now we have a whole retention team that we're working to support, as we've kind of grown into our skin, if you will, as a company. But yes, I've grown from 8 people, doing a lot of different things, to now almost 40 individuals, very focused on data. And, we do, as I said, we have data architecture, engineering, and the customer data supporting our messaging. So what's exciting to me is I think right now we have 35, and we call them business priority list projects. So these are things that our business says is really important. They rank them 1 to 35, so that we know what we should be working on. But right now my team has deliverables in 23 of those 35. So, and those projects will all be gone in the next 3 months, and they'll be replaced by a slate of new projects. So there's this continuous work that you're doing. People understand that data is there. People understand that data is important to be at the table. And, so there's no pushback when we say, hey, we need more resources to do this, or we can do this better with this piece. So yeah, it's just a great team.
If you are interested in customer value management, check out our customer value management body of knowledge. CVM Block is a comprehensive guide for CVM professionals, offering tips, tools, and best practices to help you in your job. Visit cvmblock.com for more. Mike, you mentioned a lot about, this kind of positive leadership and
the values of the team, that you bring people together to do the tough job. What are the, let's say, technical competences necessary in this modern and very, very fast-paced data management area? So what kind of different departments do you have for
Well,
data management?
one of the things that, and it was funny, I resisted this for a very long time, and it's interesting, and thankfully I've got, leaders underneath me that really push me to kind of acquiesce to it. But even as basic as, understanding agile development and understanding, JIRA processes and how we should go through and, create these scrums and create these teams, these working teams and working groups that are working on a section of the business. I was always kind of, I guess, when you look at my career, I was kind of focused on the Tiger team effort, where I would assemble a team and put them on a project and might disassemble them and put them on something else. And I think, when you're working on singular projects that are pretty large, that probably works pretty well. But when you're trying to support 35 different initiatives, or 23 different initiatives, and always shuffling, I think really understanding the processes and the agile methodology has been incredibly important, just as a framework, so that people don't get lost, and hiring project managers that can do that. I am so proud of my project management team. I have a person that's just focused on, basically herding the cats of all the data folks, and then being the voice of that back to the business. And she's probably my most important person. She's not a data specialist, but she's probably my most important person, because she can speak the technical language to all of my team, and then she can speak the program language to the program folks. But then when you look at the technology, and the things where I grew up, and, I learned how to code in Fortran, and then JavaScript is part of it, and I can certainly write SQL. My team now is programming in Glue. They're Python. Everything is Python, and I think they're using some tools like DBT, which is a tool that helps them basically author and extract the lineages in. But I really think it's just a modern architecture, is trying to understand all the AWS pieces that come in. Certainly a group that focuses on machine learning and concepts, and now even looking it into large language model and how we're going to leverage AI in some of these things. You just see those technologies continually evolving. I feel a little bit remiss. I probably should have learned Python at some point in the team. I think every one of my folks, probably writes at least some Python code, and most of them live in Python. I'm no help to them. They're not going to pick up the phone and say, "Mike, this problem, what do I do?" And I'm like, "Well, you need to call Bob, or you need to call Mary, because they can help you. I can't." But, I think it just, one of the things that I always strive for, because when you're in part of an organization that really, and I've got to say that being part of this organization, my leadership is incredibly empathetic. And so I think when you're leading an organization, you always are helping these folks grow. You're always trying to say, let's grow as a team, and I hope you stay here forever. But then you're also saying, look, develop yourself, get some skill sets here, get some initials by your name, so that you market yourself to the next potential. Take the experiences you're learning here, grow yourself, and, and that'll help you be successful. So I've always been proud of my ability to help people soar with their strengths, and that's certainly something I learned from Toyota. That was, one of our banners, but basically to help people understand. You look at what you've done over your career. Probably my biggest contribution right now is in hiring folks that have gone on to be amazing people. And the current CTO of Toyota Motors North America and Toyota Connected is a gentleman that I looked at and I said, man, this guy is just brilliant, and let me help him kind of grow some of the things that will help put that brilliance into focus. And he would have been successful without Mike Burkes in his life, but I've always been proud that, I gave him his first opportunity to kind of grow and just expand beyond everyone's, imagination.
I think that magic capability to build the team and to grow people is really often underlooked, especially in kind of leadership positions as you are, Mike. I have one super tough question for you, because that question is, How do you imagine, let's say, the perfect execution of enterprise data management? What would be the outcomes in the organization when you would say, I'm done?
Well, if I'm done, then that means I probably don't have a job. So, it was really interesting. I got a lot of stuff automated when I was in the Air Force. I got a lot of stuff automated where I was kind of coming in and babysitting because I was working within a defined budget. I had created a database, my very first attempt at creating a database, and I had titled it Argus, which was another rough guess under stress was kind of the acronym for that. And, I put this database out there and it was really meant to help because my particular focus was to manage the budget. And so, you have a lot of flight test engineers that were really, really hungry to go out and fly. They love to fly. You give them a plane and a toy and they go fly every day. But then you have, the Air Force is saying, here's a budget we have for training. And so my job was to kind of keep them out of the cockpit when they were trying to fly, when they'd actually achieved what, like if they had done a test sortie on an F-16 or an F-22 and had landed 5 times during that sortie, then my job was kind of to put the data together and say, you know what, you don't need to go out and fly today to get another sortie because you've already got those in your flight test. And so I had a lot of pilots that were not very happy with me. But I think, putting that together so that we were controlling the budget and helping to show the Air Force that we had accountability. I was at a really special time in life because I had been a flight test engineer, and then toward the end of my career with the Air Force, I was put into a program. America went through this, kind of total quality management where it was really, let's set KPIs at the top and let's push those KPIs down to the organizational units. So I was brought on to kind of do that, especially with the focus of, several $1 million that we were doing for budget management for fuel costs. And we had historically not been very well. We'd historically had to go back at the end of the year to get more money from the Air Force, which caused other programs to suffer as we were getting, money to keep our pilots trained. So you do that, you establish, kind of something that is working very, very well. But then you look at the data and say, well, how can I improve upon this? And so then you start looking around at the other processes. One of the things that I was most proud of is, unfortunately in the area of flight tests where men and women are putting themselves in great danger doing things that are really advancing what was out there. You would run into mishaps. You would run into a plane that, had an issue, or you'd run into something that, would cause something to go wrong. And so we would stand up these alerts, and there was just such a struggle with everyone when we knew that there was something happening. And we were trying to get the information out. And I was looking at my another rough guess under stress database, and I'm like, wow, I have all that information right here. And so I would monitor, we set up, kind of real-time alerts to monitor when we were being alerted that somebody was having an in-flight emergency. And we could go out, we could look at the crew, we could understand the specific training needs of the crew. We would notify the base commander, we would notify the squadron commanders, we would notify the hospital, all through automated means, just to say, look, this is, what is happening in your space. This is the real time happening. And here's the training and the things that, you can bring to the table. If I had just sat at my job and said, look, my job was to get the budget within 1% or, 0.01% and just sat back and was, satisfied with that, then, I was doing a great job at that. By pushing that envelope, you're actually changing things. And so that's why I don't think it ever is going to be something that's done. I think now that new data is out there and new ways to use data will always be there. I think if you wake up in the morning and the lights are all green on, your data quality's come through and everything's loaded fine, then that you've prepared the business the best they can for what's going to happen that day. But you never know what's going to happen that day. So you never know when a new system, a new challenge, a new opportunity is going to arise, and you just got to be ready to react to it.
So it seems that, Mike, you have some inner passion for that data that drives you, I solve one problem and then, another 10 projects are coming in. It's,
I think context switching is probably my greatest skill set, but that probably comes from being a parent to, a lot of kids. I always told everybody it was really cheap to have kids in the Air Force, because our medical care was great. And, I would come home from a mission and the next, 9 months later, we'd be having another child. So, but then when you have 6 kids in the fold and you're now trying to manage kids that, are 10 years apart, it gets kind of challenging. So I think that's where all the ability to context switch came in.
This is where your skill set, to manage those 35 projects priorities, and it's like,
it's important. I think prioritization is really important, and I think any organization has to align themselves with the leadership to understand what is the most important. There's too much work for my team to do, right? And you think of that person that's trying to get that 35th priority project out. That's really important to them. Right. And so you have to treat them with the respect that we understand that's important. We have this number one project. And so sometimes you have to use that priority to say, look, we're going to be a little bit delayed in getting this out because we simply have to do that. And I think that, as a leader, that again is something that you have to be really, willing to do, is to go to fight for your team and say, look, you asked us to prioritize this. We're doing this. This is going to suffer a little bit, but, rest assured, we understand that this is what you need, and we understand, and we're going to get this delivered. But it's we're following the priorities that you have set.
Mike, I know that you are, as a company now, really advanced in data management part, but there are like thousands of companies who are just starting their journey. They now have those Excel reports, which the organization is sharing, and they want to move further. So what would be your, top 3 or 5 ideas where to start with, and what are the most important aspects that they should start from?
I think, the first thing is you kind of have to learn what the business outcomes that are expected, or what, those reports are generating as far as business outcomes, and what's most important in it, right? Are you trying to gather enough data to make a directional change? Are you trying to gather very specific, concrete data so that you're meeting some kind of a regulatory demand and it has to be perfect? Or are you simply, just doing something to kind of understand, are you headed, in the general right direction? So I think you need to understand the business need for that data, and then you put the right amount of rigor to it. When I came in here, we have an individual in this organization that, he's very dear to me. He had become the guru of all of our data. And, I kind of upset, and he was so well respected by the other 7 members on the team because he was a guru of the data. And the very first presentation I put together, I had him kind of singled out and said, well, this is, kind of the risk we have in this organization because everything flows through him. So what we have to do is we have to set the data up so that everybody in the organization understands. And, and 8 years later, I'm not sure that we're as far as long as we can, because there's so much that's being created. And sometimes, you're not taking the time to document as thoroughly as you should. But I think that, if I was saying that, somebody's got a lot of spreadsheets, look for commonalities against the spreadsheets, look for the business outcomes, always track to make sure that you're looking for those business outcomes, and then look for the right place and the right technology to apply to get those business outcomes. And by the way, in our organization, it's Google Sheets. It's not Excel.
I still love both Google Sheets and Excel sheets. They're still amazing, but maybe not for everything.
Toyota was completely Excel, and we do have a lot of the finance folks who use Excel, and I love the formulas and stuff. But I just think, the cost. Every organization is different. Every organization is different in the amount of money that they can put toward things. And Google was a cheaper alternative at that time. So that's why, a lot of our folks use that. And what you find with innovation is a lot of the team members will leverage tools to make their lives great. And we processed refunds on Google Sheets for a long, long time. And it was a great way for us to do it, but it sure didn't make getting that data out and getting it, out to the business so we could understand when somebody was likely to give us a refund. It made it harder, right? So that's where you let a process run for a long time until you kind of understand that the business has grown big enough that you really need to have better eyes on it. So now you go through and you understand how to ingest that data into the business, and, and how to make reporting on it so that it can go out to kind of serve a larger purpose.
And how important is let's say top management support in the journey of going from, let's say, less governed data to like the future state? Is it can you achieve it something without the support there?
I've been very blessed in my career here at Ultra. By having leadership, at the very, very top, super empathetic leadership that treated us with respect. And so, keeping people motivated because keeping people motivated when they knew they had a company that cared about them is so much easier than trying to motivate someone where it's not clear if the management even cares. Everybody here knows that our management cares. Everybody here knows that our management is sincere about wanting us to get the most out of life. So it's a great organization to work for, and it's been recognized as one of the best places to work for, and it's been recognized as fastest growing, and so just a lot of great things that our leadership did. So you take it down a notch, having leaders that understood the importance of data and that really had a passion for understanding just how close margins are. So really, trying to eke out every perspective, wanting to go to the parent company with ideas and being able to prove those ideas in data. Yes, you might, give us a better pricing on this. And yes, it may seem like, we're going to be running risk of revenue, but this is what we think it's going to grow. And here's the data support that we think this is going to grow this way. I think, really having that leadership that just understands the value. And, it wasn't always that way. I mean, there were times when, on our engineering side, there was kind of those are the analytics guys, stay out of our business. I think over time, we've kind of matured as an organization, and we have regular meetings. Probably one of my closest allies in this is the team leader of our IT and organization. And it's very interesting to me because I report to the CFO of our company. So I report up in the business side, where at Toyota, I reported to the CTO of Toyota. So I think, where you are in the organization and the relationships you make, but there's trust that has built up between the engineering team and our team. And so when I pick up the phone and say, hey, I really need your help, we've got some issues that are happening because, we've got a process that may be creating bad data. I get somebody that listens to me instead of somebody that becomes defensive. And I think, once you get over that barrier, and I think part of it is being humble in your mistakes, right? I think one of the nits about me, or one of the things that, there's been some frustration in the past, is that I am quick to escalate things when I see things, and, it's not necessarily a sky is falling, but I'm very quick to escalate and, very quick to say, here's a potential outcome. And sometimes those outcomes don't get realized, but I think as long as you're calling the alert and you're calling it with sincerity and you're calling it with really a passion for making the business better, eventually people will say, okay, yeah, that's just Mike going off on it. It's probably not that big a deal, but it's something we should turn our attention to.
But why is it so important to escalate early? Because usually people tend to escalate as far in the process as possible.
Because again, you're running on margins that are very, very, you're not selling, you're not selling expensive things. I mean, you're selling products that are, $15 to $20 each. And if you run into an issue where maybe you keep a promotion that was intended to, hit a subset of the users, it might not show up. We will often run a promotion that if you come in from one of our competitors, we'll give you a break. But what happens when, code changes and all of a sudden you're giving that break to everybody, right? So, the business is still seeing sales come in, but suddenly the revenue is being impacted. So when you see that and you don't have margins to make tons of changes, I think that's where it becomes, something you want to do. We've set up an internal process that really, kind of looks at our own mistakes as a company, and when we do things that impact our ability to to get revenue in, or ability, and that's been put under me to kind of every month coalesce a report that says, look, here's what our operational inefficiencies, or here's what the things and mistakes that we made might even be mistakes on my team, in trying to apply data in some pieces. Here's the mistakes that we made, and here's the material impact to the business. And I think just being able to talk about those mistakes, and again, I credit our leadership for, wanting us to be transparent. I don't think people here are punished for failure. I think, obviously repeated failure would be something that would be frowned upon, but I think everyone sees it as a growing opportunity to say, let's not do this again. So that's what makes this organization fantastic.
So, Mike, time flies really, really fast, and we are approaching our wrap-up part. We would like to ask you a couple of questions that we ask every guest. So, the question number one is, over those years, I bet you had many proud moments of your career. Could you share one or two of them here?
Yeah, I think that the moment that I'm proudest of is not a moment, but it's kind of a point in time. As I said, I work for Toyota, and I worked for Toyota during a big time in our history of the unintended acceleration, where there were a lot of folks that had purported that Toyotas were causing people to get in accidents because they were accelerating. We had data to show a lot of behaviors within the car, or behaviors of the operator of the car, that was kind of contradictory to what was being purported to us. But I think the ability to rally, and I've never been prouder of the system we built. We basically took 14 different systems, which included our warranty systems, included voice manipulation of our people that are calling our customer care, the service people coming in, the NHTSA, the National Highway Standards, basically data coming in, and it tied it all together. Using a technology that was, kind of a key valued pair. It was so expensive to run it at that time. And this is where, I hired that guy that came in and made it work. And it's just a magic. But, imagine going into a BI tool and typing in sushi as a key search word, and it coming up and saying, something from a NHTSA database. I got sick because I was using the refrigerated, glove compartment, and I put my sushi in there, and the sushi spoiled and I got sick. Think of the ability to do that in terms, and being able to that's a microsecond. And I remembered when I showed this to the president of Toyota, and I came in, and he, in his mind, was thinking of something that was happening along the border between Canada and the United States, where there were some dealers that were selling cars and basically swapping out, cars were a little bit cheaper on one side of the border than the other, and so they were swapping out speedometers so that, because the Canadians were in kilometers, the United States were in miles per hour, and so they're swapping them out. And he just typed in that keyword and instantly saw all that data on what was happening in his supply chain and what was going, and the dealers that were impacted. And he could really, you just saw the light go on in his eyes and the joy at knowing he had that. What we were able to show out of that, and that's where I think, the analysis, once you have the data come, is what we were able to show is a little bit of a bias against Toyota, and that really helped us. As we were talking to the government and being able to show them where potentially they were looking at Toyota in a little bit muted light, because here's one of the competitors that would have, pretty catastrophic things happen. A drive shaft fell off and they would get one claim. Here's a Prius that, came in for a battery failure, and all of a sudden there's 7 claims because the guy said that one time his window didn't go up or down or one thing. And so they were kind of overinflating the claims against Toyotas, and being able to show that in that context was really, really happy. And it's funny how life is. When I was flying for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, one of our customers on our plane was the Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Sheila Widnall. And I had so much respect for her. She was an MIT professor. Her husband was an MIT professor, and I would talk to them on these long flights, and we would just strategize and just talk cool stuff. Toyota, the government actually hired Dr. Widnall to run the team that was, looking to find issues with Toyotas, because Toyota opened the doors and said, come look at all of our code, bring your best scientists, help us find it if there's something wrong. And Dr. Widnall actually led that team, and just the surprise and delight of seeing her and her seeing myself, and just, knowing that she could trust me, that was really, really cool. So I think that's the greatest success in helping that team through that. Ultra has been great just because I think we've helped push the business along. But again, I can't take the credit for that. I think we've got some brilliant leaders that have just really done the right marketing strategies, really got the right people behind us. Certainly, just the way that team has grown. I can't take credit for it, but I don't think I was an adherence for
that. Michael Humble Burkes, yeah. It's like, but I think you also had some failure stories that you could share with us as well to make sure that it's not everything beautiful in life.
Well, I think failures are really opportunities to learn, right? So I think that's really, and hopefully, it's not something that causes something catastrophic. I remember something that helped me to learn very early, in my career, and it was a flight test in Wichita, Kansas, with pilot, co-pilot, Boeing engineer, and myself, and we were out testing a couple of things. We were testing a voice automated autopilot in our special research bed, but we were also testing a new landing system that was really, really quite unique in the way it was, pushing data in. And so you'd taken the 707 and you'd probably done 25 touch and goes. And doing 25 touch and goes in a 3 or 4 hour sortie is exhausting. It's exhausting for the pilots that are doing that. It's exhausting for the folks that are capturing the data. We had started because we wanted to get away. We wanted to actually do this around Kansas City because there's weather that comes into Kansas City and makes it very hard to land. And so we were doing this kind of, through fog, and which is eye strain and everything. But we were writing notes furiously. The Boeing engineer and myself, the pilots were flying. We were writing the notes, and we were recording the data in, a system that was state of the art at that time, 30 years ago, that had probably 30 gigs of data in it, maybe probably not even that, probably maybe 30 megs. But we all assembled after the flight in this room, pretty late at night, like 9 o'clock at night, in Boeing's headquarters there in Wichita. And I remember I had all these sheets of information, and we were talking about it, and always being the person wants to innovate, I said, let me go make copies of it. So I took these sheets of paper to a copier, and there was a person, using that copier at that time and running mimeographs for, an organizational thing that came. And I said, hey, can I make copies of this real quick? And he said, sure. So I stacked my papers up on it. I pushed go to make 4 copies, and the pages started coming out blank. And I'm looking at it thinking there's a problem with the copier. And what I realized or didn't realize is that all of the notes that we've been taking had been taken on thermal paper. And so when you put thermal paper through a copier that's just ran 100 copies, as they went through, they instantly turned black. And so I had to walk back into that room of exhausted people, and I had destroyed their data. I had destroyed a data point that we were all depending on. And it really kind of helped me understand. And again, everybody, I've always been accommodated, I guess in my career, where people say, hey, it's a mistake. It was an honest mistake. We understand it. Don't make it again. But, walking in and understanding how important it is, that taught me that data protection, we've got to really, really be careful about information, because I kind of looked at the sadness in all of those eyes, understanding we still had the data on disk and we still got, success out of it, but we missed a piece of it because I had been careless with the data. So even though that only impacted, the lives of the 3 people, besides myself that had been there, it really taught me a poignant story about, protect data at all costs. Make sure that, you're careful with it, because it's something that sometimes can't be replicated. So I've carried that through. Larger term failures, I think it's just in, probably some technologies that we, you work hard to ask a company to invest in a technology, and maybe you don't do your homework enough, or maybe you kind of understand or get swayed by the vapor salesmanship of the company, the selling company, and things just don't work. And, I was really successful at Toyota because I did not have any failures. I tend to pick technologies that would grow on to greater and bigger things. I've had some stumbles at Ultra, smaller company going on smaller expenditures where we try something and it just doesn't work. And, you've dedicated resources to it, you've dedicated time, you've dedicated dollars that are really important, and it just doesn't come to the fruition. So I think those are the things that, I would look back and say, dang, I wish, I'd did a little bit more homework, or I'd been a little bit more sure, because I kind of led some, folks that are working really hard down a path that didn't come to their fruition. And that's the hardest thing to come, a year later and say, look, I know I asked you to spend $75,000 on this, and I wasted your money because we just didn't get it. We learned some lessons, but we just didn't get it done. So.
These are very inspiring examples. I just try to imagine, the face of your team when you're coming with those black sheets of paper.
It's hard. It's hard. I'm not a very good storyteller, so it's hard to to put the exhaustion that's on. If you can imagine trying to land, tons of aircraft in fog on a runway in Kansas City, and just the strain for those poor pilots and trying to do that, and the trust they're having. And, here's this guy that comes in and all of the notes that we were taking, all of their comments. And of course, today, 30 years later, all of that would have been digitally recorded, and, we wouldn't have had the issues. But we were writing on pieces of paper, and it was going so well. I just kept ripping off pieces of paper from our fax machine and handing it over. We were just taking pages of notes. So, yeah, that was quite the experience.
Yes, I can imagine, And the last question, Mike, it's like for people who would like to grow in data career, what learning resource would you recommend for them?
Well, it's interesting. I think that, you learn from experience. So get yourself experience in as many places as you can. I always, ask people when they're to talk amongst themselves, because data, there's so many pieces of data, right? There's the folks that are managing the storage of it, managing the efficiency of how a database is operated, kind of the physical database engineers, right? You have the folks that are transforming the data and kind of making it useful. You have the folks that are doing the analytics around it. So I always encourage to talk up and down the stack. I think every data person should understand some of the business context at the very least. I mean, I think certainly as you get closer to the consumer endpoint, where you've got your business intelligence and your data science team, they have to understand the data exactly. They have to understand the business context. But if you go back to the person that's just being asked to, copy data from here to here, I even think it's important for them to understand the big picture of it. That's why I've always loved data lineage, to go in and say, yeah, you may look at it that you're taking this piece of information and copying it from this Aurora database over to Snowflake so it can be curated out. Understand how that's going to be used. So I think, getting folks to talk about those. I think, a lot of the teams have taken courses, some of the courses that are out there to grab, certifications around, some of the technical components, like some of the AWS components and the AWS tools. I think also, putting folks into, courses that are around this, like maybe, getting them to get certification in data science or data analytics, or maybe now in AI. I think there's just, a lot of resources that are out there. And one of the things, again, that I love about this organization is we follow something called the entrepreneurial operating system, where it's based on the process of, if you only focus on the small day-to-day things, you never grow. So you got to have some of these big rocks. I really encourage my team to look for things that they can use as a rock that's a self-development, something that will help them develop themselves. And it might be in, I always try to make sure it's within the data space, but maybe you have a data engineer and you're trying to talk to them about, well, think about how you would do data quality. So get some training on data quality so you can understand what's right in your ETL scripts or your transformation scripts now in DBT that we can extract and say these are business rules. So there's no one simple answer. I think it's just always keeping your eye open and understand the chain of data from beginning to end, and kind of the value points in each of them.
I think there are so many brilliant data engineers who grow further into becoming business leaders as well. So
absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you, Mike. It was really exciting to have you today.
Well, thank you for inviting us and letting me share a little bit of my story. And I, as you know, I've always had a great partnership, with teams that you've been associated with. So I think we've got a great working relationship, and it's an honor to be able to speak with you.
CVM Stories is produced by Exacaster. We help companies take their customer value management to the next level. To stay updated on our latest episodes, subscribe to the podcast or sign up for an email newsletter at exacaster.com/cvmstories.